Cayce again plays a role in my books, in my studies. As far as I can tell here, there was going to be another program I was going to be doing, but what is it? I know that I'm going to be doing a group regression session, and that is something that within a couple of hours someone can actually experience, having a taste of impressions, memories, recall interesting people that you know right now who perhaps may have been with you before. So that should be fun. And I see that here is on the schedule here for April the 21st. I'm also going to be doing a tarot class at some point, but I don't know when. I've got some flyers here for Edgar Cayce with an overview and looking at the different planets. But if I give them to you now, then you're going to be like, so I'll do you in about 3 minutes. So I wanted to share a couple of different things. First of all, who here is aware of the work of Edgar Cayce? Okay, yes. Okay, we're just about halfway through now. And when I take a look at the really interesting person that he was, a relatively simple person, a sincere Christian, and he was born in Kentucky, and he started giving these readings, first of all with his own issue, and then a traveling hypnotist came into town, and he had laryngitis, and he was a salesman. You can't do that very well. And so the hypnotist put him into a trance. He diagnosed himself, and then he said, what we need is to bring some energy, some blood, some healing to the throat. Just a second, he says, and he did it, and his throat gets really red, and then he could speak. But of course, the interesting thing that maybe he didn't know at the time was that it's a setup, right? This is a spiritual cosmic setup, where you might have an illness, to be able to get the healing, to understand your gifts, to give your gifts to the world. So, really a great story right there. So then he did these health readings for many years, maybe like 20 years or something like that, and then got a very good reputation. People coming to him with various issues, worries, ailments, and things like that. And he was known for his holistic approach. Herbs and massage and chiropractic adjustments, osteopathy, things like that. And then there came a time when someone said, you go into a trance, and by the way, he didn't remember what he said most of the time, so they had a stenographer and a great bunch of records, again, over in Virginia Beach. And so he was giving these health readings for a long time, had a big fan base, and then someone came in and said, since you're like tuned in to something really big and great and wise, can I ask you about my past lives? And remember, he's a Christian Sunday school teacher. He said, well, I don't know, but we can try. And then he started talking about not only this fellow's past lives, but when he was not in the earth, in a body, in a past life, he was out, on we'll call it a planetary dynamic. Okay. Now, who here is pretty conversant in astrology? You know astrology pretty well. Okay. How many know your sun signs? Yes. Yeah. So this, of course, was a big surprise to Edgar Cayce, that he didn't know it, but he just started talking about this person as a soul going into his past lives, but then having an interplanetary sojourn on another planet, and then learning the vibrations, the points of view, the expertise from Mercury, Mars, Neptune, and then taking that experience and then coming into the body with now a new knowledge, a new set of skills and understandings based on his mercurial or Venusian experience. It's like, wow, what a cosmic story that is. It shocked Cayce almost to the point where he was going to stop giving readings, but then all the other people around him says, oh, no, please, Edgar, no. And so they talked him into it, and so then he said, okay, he continued to do that, and then for another 30 years, he continued to give these readings. And he died in 1945, and he was, the famous sleeping prophet, and he had a list of people who he wanted to see him, especially a couple of different times when they wrote some articles or some books about him, and then everybody says, oh, here's the real deal, go over here to Edgar Cayce. And he was told, by the way, that he should go to Virginia Beach because it was a special vibration place. Mm-hmm. And how many of you have been to Virginia Beach? Mm-hmm. Oh, a lot of you. Great. Yeah, it's very nice. But I've been there, done that, so it's time to do something else. So those who have been studying astrology for a long time, they are basically calculating your horoscope, sun sign, moon sign, Mercury, everything in its particular position around the circle. And then the idea is, okay, because you've got your Mercury in Sagittarius in the third house, then that means such and such. And then I'd have to say that probably the majority of astrologers think, I actually don't know what they think, but I think they think that it's the planets in a particular place in the horoscope, and that has a meaning, and then it's like a cosmic beam, perhaps, of why it would work, right? They may not even have a theory of why does it work. Some, any scientists, academians would say, man, those planets are so far away, the moon might have some influence on you because it's a large orb and it has a gravity, closer to the Earth, and so yes, it moves the tides, it can probably move our bodies, liquids and so forth. But like those other planets, they should have no influence. And yet, of course, the astrologers, having done, horoscope, and they've got a clientele, and indeed, it really does tell people things about their career, their love life, challenges, experiences to come, sometimes like, in about 4 or 5 years, this is going to happen, which could be interesting, could be cool, could be nerve-wracking to some people, depending on what they say. But with no idea of cause and effect, this is why it works. And then comes, not comes along, because, Cayce died in 1945, way before I was born, and many other astrologers. And so he actually tells how it works, which is really interesting. And I compare this to taking a trip, let's say, off to Mexico, or maybe to Ecuador, but maybe to a South American country. How many of you have been out of the country? Isn't that great? Yeah. And you pack up, you go to a different environment, you take in the food, the language, the scenes, and sometimes you can join it with like a yoga course or studying a language or something like that. And then you have a great experience, and you have changed. I mean, that has enriched you. So you take a little bit of, let's say, this Mexico experience. Many people would say, "Oh, I had a great time. I did nothing. I was on the beach." Well, okay, you weren't enriched that much. But there are others who really get into it. They might take a course or a language class, as I said, or whatever. And then it's an enriching experience, and then you come back here to the United States, and you seem to be the same, but now you're into guacamole. And maybe you've learned another interesting skill, or you like a particular style of art and music and things like that. You have been enriched, okay? And so it's the same thing with us having interplanetary sojourns. We have our life here, and then we pass away. We go to, let's say, the planet Uranus or Mars, and there is a vibrational dynamic there. And I must admit, it took me a couple of years to get this, because there was this idea at first that our souls, because it's not in the physical form, we can of course go and travel into space, and we can be on those planets. I mean, what's to stop us? Why not, right? But reading some of the Cayce materials from time to time told me that it was symbolically connected to the physical planets out there. And perhaps one could actually be there on Mars or Venus, okay? And then you're incarnated back into the body, back into your families, back into the earth. But probably the reality is that we go to a dimensional experience equivalent to the vibration of Jupiter or Saturn or Neptune, which is very interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he also said that these are different dimensions. Each planet has its own dimension. Mm-hmm. We are in the third dimension here on the Earth. You probably knew that already. Mm-hmm. But did you know how Cayce would describe our third dimension? And I find this very interesting. So we think of space, as depth by width by mass, and that is space, that kind of even beat the three dimensions. But according to Edgar Cayce, this is one word, this is one dimension, and it's called space. And that's, our mass. That's one dimension. Here on the Earth, this is why we souls come to the Earth. We want to be in the body. And then the second dimension is time. So we can take this mass and we could just walk over here, and it took about a couple seconds, but that was a time thing. And I had, now I just left an Akashic record, by the way. And so here is the second dimension here on Earth. And then the third dimension, according to Edgar Cayce, is patience. It took me a couple of years to figure that one out. But interesting, huh? So this elevates now patience, which seems to be a virtue, into a dimensional experience of why we are here. How many of you have an issue with patience? Let's go, come on, let's go. Yeah, it's there's so many virtues, issues, emotions, reactions, and things like that But it's the patience that is one of the big things that we here as earthlings are dealing with, you know? And it might be like, can we get through this already? You know, to what about those elections? Oh my goodness, you know, give me the patience, you know. And so that is one of the reasons why we're here. Interesting. That's the Earth experience. This is our third dimension here. Saturn, for instance, is one dimension. One dimension. And it's kind of flat. It's kind of condensed, you know. And astrologers, in interpreting Saturn in your chart, would say this is a place of restriction. Lessons, hard lessons. You need to exert more energy here, but then it makes you more focused, goal-oriented, etc. Cayce would disagree with that. He said Saturn is connected with changes. And to most astrologers, that is the opposite of what they say. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like the taskmaster. It's old man time. That's Saturn. You know, it's where you're dragging your feet. So if we reorient oneself to the Cayce perspective on, for instance, just Saturn, in your chart, we all have Saturns in our chart. Although I did have a couple of friends in California who they were trying to start a new astrology movement and take the bad planets out of your chart. They were fun. They didn't have the patience. So when Cayce says that Saturn is changes, what I have, again, it took me a long time to figure this out, was that the Saturn placement in your horoscopes is where you are slowly, remember it's one dimension, you are slowly moving out of that. It's a bit like the piece of sand in the oyster. And so this is where you are slow. This is where things are not moving so well. What Cayce also said is that, because he was very much into karma, and so if we got some karma, then the heaviness in lessons would send us. We're not talking about like now going to Mexico for a holiday, right? We would be sent to Saturn for the recasting, for the redevelopment of your attention. It's a bit like, I'm afraid that you failed class, you know, and you're going to Saturn. That's kind of how it is. And so the horoscope then, looking at that, then you say, this is the place where I do need to have a slow growth. But this is where changes will happen. And so it will be, according to Cayce, it will be like quick changes. But a classic astrologer would never say that about Saturn. So it's the place where you do have to make changes, where changes will be met. But then the problem with that, of course, is you might not have the patience to finish things up, and then you start again and again and again. And then that's your Saturn issue. Oh, here I am again, you know, with my Saturn. But if we had a little bit more impetus, if we had more staying power, if we had more push, we probably wouldn't be having such issues with Saturn. Another interesting thing that Cayce said, that when the soul was finished with its time out on Saturn, it would be catapulted to the planet Uranus. And Uranus is about independence, it's about the willpower, it's about being distinct, and it is the planet of extremes. Cayce said sometimes, well, this person can be very, very good or very, very bad. You know, it's extremist. People who, there's a lot of astrologers who are Uranians, by the way. So you have to be a bit of an extremist to do that. But the other thing about extreme is someone who is very interested in the ancient past. You know, archaeological digs and things like that, ancient histories and things like that. How many people are interested in that? Huh? Uranians here, as well as very futuristic science fiction, often to like, how many same people?
Yeah.
Uranians. Huh? Is that the extreme? Yeah, interesting. Also, very much, and this wasn't true at the time of Edgar Cayce, because we have now got, there's a little phone right over here making a videotape of me right now. Hi. Nothing like that in Cayce's time, right? Technology, you know, and again, that's science fiction. Now coming back into our present life. Wow, you know, all kinds of doodads and innovations and gadgets and things like that, and that's going to help our lives to be a little bit better because of technology. How many people into that technology? Huh? Some of you, yeah. It's a Uranian thing, but it could be also a Mercurial thing. Mercury loves information, ideas. It wants to communicate. Let's share. Let's connect. You know, it has a bit of a teenager energy, and likes to flirt and study, and a lot of people involved in the news industries and writing and newspapers and blogs and things like that, Mercurial types. They come from Mercury. So these are just a couple of different examples of, just to give you the big, you know, philosophical perspective, and a couple of different examples of how the planets work. Now, if some of you, maybe all of you, have had your horoscope calculated, then you kind of know in the circle, you know, where, you know, Mercury and Venus and Moon happens to be. And so I'm going to pass out these flyers, synopsis of the different planets. You can pass them on. I hope we have enough. Any questions so far? Any answers? Hey, Rachel, thank you for introducing me to GLOW.
You're welcome. So, I'm a fellow author on this subject. I have some past life regression and stories in my books, also in the bookstore, where you see the soulmates issue. But when we say the word planet and interplanetary, it seems like we're very egocentric on the Earth, when if we were from Mercury, we would consider that as the planet, and the other planets interplanetary. And also they have a spirit within them, like we talk about the spirit of Gaia being the spirit of our planet called Earth, which actually is a palindrome, sort of. Heart is in the word Earth, which we just use one of those letters. And so, do you know what the spirit names are of the other planets?
Not really, you know, but Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, I think they're fine with that.
Okay.
Except that in another language, French, German, you know, Persian, they do have different names for the planets.
Okay.
So that's why they have lots of names.
Okay.
Yeah, and I found it interesting, for instance, I speak German, and they consider the moon masculine. And of course we think of La Luna, you know, which is a romantic thing. It's a feminine thing with the cycles women and mothers and things like that. But yeah, so like, so what are the Germans up to? Thinking about the moon connected to a masculine thing.
Okay.
Yes, Brandy. On many of the different planets. But obviously with Saturn gone to 1, it's beyond time. It doesn't have time. That's interesting. And I don't know what to do with that. It's beyond my mind. Yeah.
What about the Saturn return when it hits your chart?
Right. So Saturn returns happen about age 29. It could be 28, 29, 30, but around 29. And so it takes that long a time for it to go around the zodiac. And so Saturn return is when it returns to its natal position or where it was when you were born. And then, of course, then it'll do another round, and when you're 58. Okay, and then there's another round. But what it represents is that there is oftentimes a maturing process around 29 when people will experience big lessons, sometimes setbacks, sometimes life lessons, challenges, responsibilities, new jobs, and so forth. And when that happens, they are maturing. They've grown, and so that's like a classic point where again changes happen, but it's a change in a direction. Any other questions and insights? How many of you could place these planets in your horoscope? You can kind of your horoscope well enough that you can do that. Hands? One.
Got it.
Okay, well, then it's going to be something that you can do as a take-home project here to take a look at these different planets and keywords distilled from the Edgar Cayce readings, and then online, back to technology, one can get a horoscope made, or you can go to an astrologer and have it calculated and so forth. And then I'll tell you, on those online interpretations, and mostly with a lot of astrologers, you will probably not get the Edgar Cayce slant. Okay, it's just a specialty. You might get it, we are in Virginia, but maybe not. But it adds a different, extra interesting flavor to things.
Stephen, does he follow the Vedic or Eastern philosophy?
Yeah, no, he kind of confused people by saying that it was the Persian system that should be followed. And a lot of astrologers say that hasn't been used in a long time. And it's not Indian, it's not Vedic, it's not Western. So it was a bit difficult to understand it. What he would say as the type of system to follow.
Okay.
I've been using the Western tropical zodiac for most of my studies.
Okay.
So did we run out?
Did anybody else get any business?
Brandy here. I'll take another one. Okay. The big one for you. Look, it's coming closer and closer.
Thank you, my friend.
That's fun. That's the romper room version.
I always thought of astrology as being a science, and how could it be different, like the Persian, how could it be so different than what we use today?
I would compare that to like the health sciences, like the Ayurvedic Indian systems or Chinese medicine, which are very different philosophies, different approaches towards medicine, but they all have their fan base. So, one of the interesting things about looking at these planetary sojourns is that it's part of a large, important picture of what is all of this about anyway. We as souls, and I'm going to be mentioning, more of a Cayce slant on things. We as souls, we have had many past lives, and there, at first, we're going back a long time now, at first, there were souls in spirit looking down upon the earth and thinking, wow, there's animals, there's fish swimming, there's birds flying, they're in the body. That seems interesting. I wonder what that feels like. And so then the souls infused their energies into these various bodies. This was before humans, by the way. And so this was out of pure curiosity. And when we really get into like soul travel, and that's what I do as a hypnotherapist, because we can go to the different planets, but we can also go to the great library in the sky. We can go to play areas, to recreation areas, to growth areas, to nurseries, cosmic nurseries where stars are being born, but also souls are being born. It's really quite vast and interesting. And so why not? I mean, why not follow one's free will? This was a big deal with Edgar Cayce. Free will to choose. And those souls just said, I'm going to come down into the earth, into this little blue orb, this planet over here, in the third dimension, and I'm going to find out what it's like to be a bird. I'd like to fly over there, or maybe swimming in the water. Wouldn't that be cool? I'm taking this a bit like, that trip to Mexico. Or maybe kind of like a Disney World experience. However, they were just spirit. And then they get into the bodies of animals dealing with eat or be eaten, dealing with hunger, dealing with sleep, dealing with fear of being chased by something larger, totally unprepared for stuff like that. And they kind of like got into a frozen emotional reaction and got stuck. And this was the fall. And this stuckness, this like forgetting, I'm actually a soul, I'm a spirit, I'm a part of the greater God team. And now I'm like a fish, being chased by a crocodile or whatever. And that's terrifying. And so the emotions, now they weren't used to that, the emotions of life and death, kind of like froze them into, oh boy, we are now in the bodies. And again, frozen, stuck, lost. And so then came the second wave of souls, which according to Cayce included the soul of Jesus and other souls, to say, our brethren, our family here, our souls are stuck, lost, afraid, forgetting, their divinity. And so we have to go and save them. We have to help them. We have to, what can we do? How can we do that? And they figured out slowly a way that if they incarnate themselves, then they can communicate with the lost ones and bring them and get them to remember, you're more than this. You are bigger. You are part of this. You're a soul. You're a spirit. Go back to God. Go back to spirit. And we're talking about eons. Like this took a long time. And then in order to have a better communication from body to body, from earth life to earth life, they said we have to quicken the vibration of different animals and find out which one of these animals could really start communicating more with, to get the message across. And if you know a little bit about Egyptology, you know that they had these different, half human, half creatures, in their Egyptian gods and as archetypes. They finally focused upon the apes that were quickened to evolve into humans as we know them today. And that took some time too. And then the souls could say, this is a form that can be used to communicate with the lost ones and help them to remember that they are divine so that they can go home. Pretty wild story, huh? This is totally just Edgar Cayce. I'm more of a Taoist Buddhist myself, but this is the Cayce perspective. And so part of the lessons, besides incarnating as in these human bodies so that we can communicate with each other and help the lost ones to go back home, to remember their greatness, their divinity. This helps to explain that there are, and we probably have some in our midst right now, or in your families right now, someone who is very difficult to get along with, connected to or married to someone who's so nice, understanding, patient. You've seen couples like that? How many? How many of you seen couples like that? Yeah, plenty. So that's a type of relationship, and it's a contract of a patient, older soul, let's say, that chooses to make an agreement to help that one to find or to remember their divinity, their spirit. And you see that in many different couples. There's all kinds of relationships, and that's just one type, that kind of fits into this.
Stephen, may I ask exactly, would the quickening be the divine spark in their pineal gland of that animal is such that that was chosen? The reason those monkeys or whatever of that species were chosen because of that quality of their pineal gland, which is our divine connection soul spot in our endocrine system. It's part of our endocrine system.
Cayce didn't say that, so I'm not sure. But he did mention the chakras and the spiritual centers, and the pineal is one of them. And I'm not sure if this is connected here with this list, with the planets and associated with the chakras, with the endocrine system. Is that in there? It's been a while since I've seen it. Let me see.
Just coloring.
Yes, it is, yeah. So here's Venus, for instance, is associated with the thymus and the color green. And so that's the heart center, which is what is quite natural when you think of Venus, with the heart center, and the pineal with Mercury and so forth. So Cayce did mention that, and Cayce did talk about the different vibrations. But as far as the quickening, I think it was more of like an evolutionary development, instead of focusing on any particular chakra.
Okay.
But the spiritual centers can be activated, and I find it interesting that they're associated with certain planets.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was very interesting.
Yeah. That also, as I said, we can take a look at Uranus in your chart, and if it's in a prominent position, then, we're going to find these things that we have already discussed here, that you might have an interest in something like really ancient, archaeological, historical sorts of things, as well as science fiction, and other types of extremes, You could identify that, but then at the same time, you can say, oh, the planet Uranus is also associated to the will center, which is the thyroid. And this is, remember, the planet of extremes. And so someone who could be very willful, or a doormat, which would be, again, the extremes. It's like, I will have my way, or, well, whatever, It's like the will is strong or it's weak, It's tough to find the middle ground with the planet Uranus, unless other things are involved, like if Venus were close to it, for instance. So, that's the big picture again, Cayce philosophy of how we all came into these bodies, how we've got, humans and our human form. So it's really quite interesting, and there's been many, many books about the Cayce philosophy. What he did, remember, he did not remember what he said. So it was written down, and then later on, they had writers, investigators, researchers, and so forth. They took the ideas, the notes, and specific sorts of themes, like astrology or health or massage or whatever, and then they wrote books about that particular subject. So all of that is found in the Cayce readings. And by the way, because he was a relatively simple fellow, he only read the Bible all the way through once a year for every year of his life. Okay, and so the readings have kind of a biblical King James flavor to them, even though he was, doing his sessions in the 1920s, 1930s. So like you read it and you go, oh yeah, I know this from the King James, from biblical sorts of these and thous and so forth. But that's kind of like the style. Some people find that a little bit difficult to read, but I find it interesting. But I'm a Uranian.
So he read his readings later? I mean, after that?
Sometimes it could be immediately after he did a reading. Says, "Did you know what you just said?" And so then he would find out immediately, or then later on people would synthesize some of the different themes that he talked about. Like he was really big into like Egyptology, into Atlantis, and advanced states in Atlantis, and as well as, of course, karma, the Akashic records, past lives, and things like that. I mean, he went in so many different metaphysical, spiritual directions.
I all followed his books on those topics.
Yeah, and they're very interesting, aren't they? Yeah.
Very. Even on Jesus' teachings, he had a book.
That's right. Yeah, because of course he was a devout Christian, so he really followed not only the ideas of Jesus, but also Jesus's past lives. It's like, wow, there's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. And he's alive today with another name.
He's in our hearts. So that's again the big overview, and here we have again these flyers that you can take home and start paying attention. And when I encourage you to take a look at astrology and your own charts and horoscopes. It's really fascinating, really great to get to know yourselves as well as other people that you're interacting with. You might be dating, and find out a little bit about what's going on. So, any other questions?
What was Cayce's take, being that he was such a Christian, devout Christian, and then things that he was hearing about that probably weren't even talked about in the church, or maybe if you read the Bible and thought of it in a different way, you might see it as something different. But as far as the dogmatic teachings. Was Cayce's
Yeah,
take?
yeah, as I said, he was a bit shocked at first when he started talking about, astrology, past lives, karma, and so forth. But then later on, and there was a couple of Bible study groups that were connected with Edgar Cayce, and they asked him to give readings for their study group. And that's a whole series of things on the Bible, and then interpreting things that had been lost in translations from the Bible, and says, have you looked at it this way? Or this is what they were talking about. For instance, Jesus asked his followers, who do you say I am? And I believe they said, Elijah. You are Elijah. And Elijah was a prophet that had died a long time ago. Automatically, just by the question and the answers, they were into reincarnation. But we don't talk about that right now. So some things are obvious, some things are obscured, some things are like buried. And there's been in Christian and Catholic history, there have been these periods in which they suppressed certain books, and then they've had, of course, the Nag Hammadi discoveries and the Dead Sea Scrolls and so forth. So they discovered new books that could be added to the Bible. But politics got involved from time to time.
I think because so many of his health readings were so on point, that's what made it hard to discredit a lot of the other stuff. Kind of like you said, it was interpretations of some of what was in the Bible, and it wasn't so outlandish as to, be, like instigating anybody to go do anything negative, so. Like I think especially a lot of people in the area, some like heralded him, some like were like, okay, yeah, that's kind of interesting, and then others would have probably discounted him within the community because it wasn't staunch, 'cause down, especially in that area, that's the the birth of what out here you have Jerry Falwell, and out there it's Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell, have the two biggest, kind of southern like religious churches, so made for an interesting dynamic in that area too. Where was he from originally? Somewhere out in the Midwest. So.
Who?
Cayce.
Yeah, he was born in Kentucky.
Yeah.
But most of his readings were in the Midwest as well, right?
Nope.
No.
He traveled around a little bit. He was in Georgia for a while, New York, a couple of places, but he didn't really go out. He might have gone to California, I don't know. But early on, he got a reading that he should be in Virginia Beach.
And that's where he did most of it.
That's where he did
most of that line.
Yeah.
Wow.
He is the most accurate modern psychic in our world.
Yeah, and because of all of the notes, taken, dictation,
they
then
couldn't
he's really researched quite well.
disprove any of that kind of stuff. Some of it was outlandish and far out, and some of it was like a weird interpretation of something like that, but they couldn't discredit it, so that's why he always kept more credibility even among the uber religious.
Well, an interesting thing with that, Jesse, is that I think it was like in 1930 or so, he made a prediction that there was going to be a pole shift in 1936, approximately. Okay, and so a lot of his followers were just like really kind of excited, or even in dread, that there's going to be a pole shift, in that year, and then nothing happened, and so they were like a bit disappointed, except that in the mid-30s, there were the Axis and the Allied powers building up their energies to have a confrontation. And what is Axis? It's a pole. And it's like, oh, it's an interpretation.
Not literal, but
Yeah, but definitely a shift in dynamics in a rather dangerous manner, of course, during World War II.
And it may have been a magnetic shift, not an actual physical flip.
Exactly, it could have been, they might have thought that, but
Which is normal.
but basically
That's normal.
what they really thought was like there was going to be a pole shift, But it was like, the axis powers, yeah. So oftentimes that's really helpful, whether that be dream interpretation or getting a reading from someone, and then not only the reader but also the listener should just like, oh, how can that be interpreted? That could be a couple of different ways, So watching for signs, omens, synchronicities, and things like that, and how can you grow from that? How can you learn from that? And Edgar Cayce would oftentimes say, it's back to, are you being a better person? Is this helping you to be more kind to others? Are you, taking on a job or a task or something to alleviate the hurts and fears of other people? It says, oh, that's the interpretation. That's what we have to keep on remembering. That's back to being, a good spiritual person.
That's what it's all about.
That's it. Yeah. Yes.
I'm wondering, with the cases of Dr. Michael Newton, if you're familiar, how different, if much different, or is it vastly different, Edgar Cayce's view of past and in-between bodies?
It's, I didn't see a lot of overlap with that. And I contributed to one of Michael Newton's books, and I included some astrological things in my case study for that edited book of other people following his methods. And he said, Stephen, just leave the astrology part out. So he wasn't so much into that, and he knew, of course, about Edgar Cayce, but he just followed his own research. And he's also, I've got my books up here. In fact, I'm going to be talking about some aspects of the reincarnation and past lives a couple of different times here at GLOW, as well as over at the Unity of Roanoke. I'm going to be doing a workshop over there. And so the Michael Newton plays an important position here in my book and my research, as well as Edgar Cayce. And so he was a psychologist in California and having some patients, and he used hypnosis for helping them to alleviate issues and feel better and have quicker recovery and so forth. And so he had an interest in reincarnation, but he was a doctor of psychology, so he was focused upon his patients and psychological perspectives. But then his clients started taking off on their own, And again, this is one of those things where it wasn't planned, but it was planned. Right? And so they would have these spontaneous descriptions of being in another body, in another family. And he knew enough to, that this is a past life, regression, which I didn't plan. But here they are. And so he just went with it. And then what really grabbed his attention is that they said, okay, I'm finished with this life. Now I'm not on the earth. And he says, where are you? And then they started talking about their interplanetary experiences. Life between life is what he came to call it, going into other places, other dimensions. And even what I would say, Michael Newton didn't say, what I would say is that, he followed, those souls into what Cayce talked about as those interplanetary sojourns. And he talked, and then some of these clients of his would talk about, wow, this is a very interesting place. There's lots of education going on. People are discussing things. It feels like a university, but it's not on the earth, Well, I think to myself, oh, I think he must be on Jupiter. Yeah. So they didn't say Jupiter, but it sounded like it. You know, Cayce would have said that. Michael Newton wouldn't. But still interesting stuff.
But Jupiter is a planet of expansion.
Expansion, curiosity, international,
Abundance.
that's right, you
So
know,
that
jolly,
makes sense.
good, jokes, but growth, you know, and it's always good to have, again, everybody's got all of these planets in your charts. Some of them seem to be a little bit more dormant, but again, a lot of astrologers don't know why, you know. But if we pay attention to the Cayce things, it's like, oh, even though everybody has got Jupiter in your chart, not everybody is Jupiterian, jolly, jovial, joking, international, curious, so forth like that, because their soul had the interplanetary experience on the dimension known as Jupiter, and then you're reincarnated and you bring back your guacamole. Cosmic, very curious and very fascinating how it all kind of fits together, huh? And bottom line, I think, on all of this is that as much as we might think that we're like living like this mundane life, and I got this job, you know, I got this house, and I got the mortgage, we as souls are on a divine journey, and it's bigger. It's bigger than some of these little things that we earthlings get involved with. And it's sometimes those moments and those interactions and those ahas, or a beautiful sunset, or watching a child that's grabs your attention and you just have to smile. And that's when the soul.
I don't think we ever know what a simple smile can do.
That's right.
It could be magical, yeah, and it reminds us of our divinity of that soul.
So are your books about your clients that you've had?
Yeah. So about, even though I introduced, you know, the Cayce perspective and then the Michael Newton perspective, then I've got like 40 years worth of cases, and so I've synthesized and took many of their interesting stories to elucidate different points, you know, including the different types of relationships that people can have, karmic things, cause and effect. Why did somebody, you know, die early? Why does someone have like this incurable disease? And having examples from many different clients of mine.
This is like Dolores Cannon.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of people following this. It's really fascinating work, and I'm not sure because I'm new here. I just moved here in this summer, so I don't know if there's like astrology groups here in this area, or reincarnation or past life groups here. Are there?
I'm not from Salem.
Not necessarily like the music like that.
Yeah,
Dedicated. More in pockets and at the centers, you know, around the area, we have kind of groups like that.
Well, I'm glad we have glow healing. Yeah. This is a good place. Yeah, and I thank you for that. Yeah, and this is, you know, therefore a good place that one can really get into something like that. And I've always been wanting to share stuff like this, and so yeah, we want to learn tarot. We want to learn symbology. You know, want to have a study group on astrology. Like, let's do it. Yes.
So I have another question. I'm curious about how Edgar Cayce goes from like, you know, this past life regressions in astrology to like rose water and soap sales at a store.
Right, yeah. It always depended upon the questions. And some people came to him and they had a physical illness or a problem with eczema or a problem with their digestion, and that would be the focus of the reading.
I think it's
kind of like a vibrational thing, because Rachel, I remember you mentioning before that rose has like the highest vibration
Yes, it
of
does.
the
Yes.
doodads.
Yes, it's very prominent in Lebanese cuisine as well.
Oh, yeah.
They're very holy people, and so if you can have roses on your property, it would really improve your life if you put it on the perimeter, especially because I have done that and it has done that for me. Yes.
There were a lot of little staples, but I think some of that came more from that being continual things that he kept getting. So things were stronger than others. Like there was a strong connection with like eating almonds, you know, to help ward off cancer, and castor oil packs. So there were certain treatments that seemed to transcend other ones, and those, you know, and it was also efforts to kind of help the center stay open too, because he had financial support early on, but you know, that ended up, so kind of heritage sprung up, I think, a lot out of the people trying to help keep, you know, the Cayce Center going. So more of the other things came in, but he had quite a few that, you know, he had, you know, some of it there were explanations for, and there were other things where there weren't necessarily scientific merit for, like, you know, but they're finding more validity now.
Yeah, and there's many interesting stories and anecdotes about him giving those readings, you know, and whether that be giving advice about, you know, good old homespun recipes and things like that. And there was one time where he was giving a particular remedy, and he mentioned a product, and the person was actually in the store at the time, like hundreds of miles away, you know, and they were on the telephone, and he said, no, it's there on the back shelf on the right. You know. And then there was another time where he would just ask at the beginning of a reading, we need to know your name, your birth time, and your location. And he starts the reading, and he says, the person's not here. You know, he's in this, you know, psychic state. Person's not here. And so they found out later that the person was on the way to the location that he said that he would be, but he wasn't there yet. And he felt that. My person's not here. Yeah, so many great stories and anecdotes, you know, about Cayce. Okay, well, I think I've wasted enough time.
Thank you.
And so I'm going to be doing a couple of different programs, as I said, and obviously I do past life regressions and astrology charts. I've got some cards, got some books, and I encourage us all to grow and be good citizens and to stay spiritual.
Thank you.
Thank you.